And also, Kate, thank you for the notes. All right. I'm going to call to order the July 25th, 2024 Lexington Planning Commission meeting. And we'll start out with an approval of the agenda. Does anybody have anything that they would like to add or change? And I'll look for a motion.
Move approval of the agenda.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. Okay, next up is the minutes from the the July 11th meeting. Which seemed very comprehensive to me. Does anybody have any comments, concerns, questions, additions? All right, then I'll look for a motion
To approve the minutes from July 11th.
Second.
Whatever. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. All right. Citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda is the next item. So if anybody in our audience has comments that they would like to make on things that are not on our agenda, can step up to the podium. And I'm going to close that citizens' comments section and we'll move on to new business. So we've got PS 2024-03, an application by Sam and Jackie Calhoun proposing a preliminary subdivision plat boundary line adjustment for a parcel located at 31 Chamberlain Loop, TM number 39-1-1-17 in Lexington, Virginia, and an adjacent parcel located in Rockbridge County, Virginia. So we're going to start out with a staff report from Arnie.
Good evening to you all. We do have a request for a boundary line adjustment. If you notice on page 1 of your staff report, the rear lot line for the two properties in question, and we've only opened the one public hearing, but this will, almost everything that we say will apply to the next one as well. So you see the lot number, address number 31 there outlined in orange. And that boundary line actually goes all the way back to the rear boundary line of the Weatherburn subdivision. So these are two lots back in 2020 that were adjusted. These are the only two that actually go all the way back. So the GIS map with that gray boundary is incorrect. These are the only two that, again, go all the way back to the rear property boundary. And during that period of time, there was also a requirement or an offering that they provide a 3-foot wide walking easement across the back of these two properties so that people, in theory at least, who are in the open space on one side could cross their property and get to the open space for the Weatherburn subdivision on the other side. So those are the existing conditions. If we flip over to the next page, that area that Kate has hatched in orange, that is what is in question. And that is currently in Rockbridge County. So there's a larger 4 or 5 acre piece of property in Rockbridge County that will be subdivided. They're first asking for us to accept the boundary line adjustment so that these two smaller parcels could be added to the city parcels. They will remain in Rockbridge County, and therefore the zoning that these have to conform to will be Rockbridge County zoning. But they don't meet the minimum lot size of 2 acres, so therefore they're asking to append or add these two parcels or pieces to the parcels that are in the city. So therefore they would be legal parcels in the city and still remain at least partly, or a portion will remain in the county. And again, that portion that remains in the county is under the Rockbridge County zoning requirements or ordinance. Actually, they have a land development regulations, but same thing. So our step would be first, and then if it's approved, that the city will accept the boundary line adjustment, then they will still go to Rockbridge County to actually do the subdivision from that parent parcel, subdivide off these two smaller pieces, and then they will still have something that remains that continues to meet the minimum lot requirements in the county. So what you're specifically being asked is to add a 0.206 acre portion of that unimproved tract in Rockbridge County to the 31 Chamberlain Loop property. Staff does recommend that the preliminary plat be approved as submitted. That's all I have for presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, does anybody have any
I
questions?
do. Where you were talking about a right, not a right of way, but a small easement. So tell us where that is on here, please.
That is not shown on here, but it goes across the backyards. So
Those are the backyards that are in the city.
correct, because the two pieces, and perhaps if you look on page 1 of the staff report, you will see that 31 Chamberlain Loop that is outlined in orange has a little light colored back patio on the back side. That's what you see on the aerial.
Mhm.
Just beyond that is a little bit of grass green strip.
Mhm.
This is roughly 3 feet wide. So that's the area where you can walk across the rear part of the Calhoun's yard and Miss Trump's yard to get from one part of the open space and continue across their yards to get to the other part of the open space. So it's across those little slivers of green that you see at the rear of their
That makes sense.
dwellings.
And this doesn't bother them that now people are still going to have access to their backyard.
And it's a recorded easement as I'm understand it. So this isn't going to change any of that.
Okay.
For this additional parcel, what could be done with it? Can anything be built on it?
According to my counterpart in the county, Chris Sladen, a house cannot be built on it because it does not meet the minimum lot size. So it is not a true conforming lot. But he believes that there could be accessory uses such as the shed could potentially be built on it. And that's something that they would have to then request from the county or make sure that it is acceptable according to the county zoning ordinance.
So with no house, nothing that couldn't already be built there now, that's all that can be built there, right?
Correct. And one way of looking at it is
Anything other than you can't build a house.
correct, because it wouldn't be a parcel that meets the minimum size requirements in the county. So a main dwelling would not be allowed. It's R1 zone and they have a 2-acre minimum lot size. So they potentially could, on these two parcels that are being added in, have an accessory building of some sort. And that's the same thing that could be built there now, as an example. Somebody owns a 5-acre or a 4.4-acre parcel. If they wanted to build a house there, they could add an accessory dwelling. So, or an accessory building, I shouldn't say dwelling, an accessory building. And I don't believe that changes any of the rear lot standards for how close that accessory structure can be from the property line. If it's either as it is currently configured with one larger parcel, or if we end up with these two smaller parcels being added to the city parcels.
And technically right now, is it the Wilbers who own this piece of property? They could in fact put a house right there.
Yep, that's what I'm getting
Like a
to.
whole house, not just an accessory
Oh.
unit. They could put an entire house on that corner of their property right now.
According to
this-
whatever the setback requirements are, yes.
Any other questions for Arnie?
Both
Oh,
of these, excuse me, both of these lots, though, however, whatever they do, have to abide by the homeowners association rules and
Only the portions that are in the city. So lot number 17 and lot number 18, which again, I think are 31 by address and 29 by address. But the pieces that are being added, so that area that's shaded or hatched in orange remains in the county, and we cannot put the homeowners associate. Well, I'll say this. We cannot put the plan unit development rules and regulations on it because that's our zoning district. Whether or not the homeowners association on their own and the covenants and restrictions, that's private. And I don't know the answer if they could technically be added in to the covenants and restrictions. But the zoning remains with the county.
Mhm. So just to make sure I understand, like we could not require that in any case.
No.
We can't make any requirements over something that remains zoned in the county.
That's correct. Because one of the neighbors had that question, Stephen McAllister, who you see on the plat there, it would be not not adjacent to the property that we're talking about, but adjacent to the next petition that's coming forward. They had that particular question. I spoke with my counterpart, Chris Slayton at the county, also checked in with our city attorney, and we can only have zoning control over parcels that are in the incorporated city and not with something that's not within our boundary.
Thank you.
Arnie, would you say that effectively this is just bringing some property into the tax rolls for the city? Is that sort of all that we're changing?
And that's a good point because I did not read that. The applicant also provided you on page 11 a short statement, and it says exactly that they are bringing this parcel into the city. I really don't think it would generate much because it's just land area with no improvements on it, at least not currently. But yes, they are attaching this and it would be completely taxed by the city.
But everything else is overseen by the county.
Zoning would be
Right.
correct.
So this is literally, I mean, we're just saying, yes, you can bring it into the county and be taxed on it. I mean, sorry, into the city and be taxed on it in the city.
And I
Is there
think
anything else, any other legal?
nothing else on the legal side. I think what we're trying to do is accommodate a desire by the two property owners. They would like to preserve sort of that rear yard space that, quite honestly, they thought was part of their property because of what they were told. So they thought that, and the homeowners association was even taking care of some of that property back there. That's actually the Wilbur's part of the Wilbur's property,
Mhm.
and some improvements as far as drainage and sodding and whatnot has occurred back there. And they didn't realize that this was not on the Weatherburn property until a dead tree issue came up, and a surveyor was called in, and this was discovered that that area is actually on the Wilbur's property and not on Weatherburn or the two property owners that are here this evening. So that was sort of what started this off, and we're trying to accommodate. And of course, our benefit is a little bit additional tax based on the additional property that's coming in, but the zoning is still going to stay for that portion that remains in the county will be county zoning.
Right. Any other questions for Arnie? Okay, well, would the applicant like to make a statement? And if you'll come up and state your name.
My name is Brian
Address.
Kearney, and I'm an attorney in town. I represent both Mr. Trumps and the Calhouns and actually the Wilburn, so I got them all. And it did happen,
Sorry, do you need his address?
and this did come about, just as Arnie said, when the tree fell, all of a sudden we realized the back parcel was not part of the subdivision. Now, we have been in touch with the HOA. It's not a requirement, it's not something before you, but they know what's going on. They do not oppose it. We're going to be doing a separate arrangement with them to deal with that. So if you see the pictures, our backyards came right up to what we thought was an area that's been mowed and taken care of, and that turns out to be in the county, not in the city. So we're just asking for a boundary line adjustment to add the small pieces to the two lots. Which is, it has an open area than some woods back in there, just so for basically our backyard. And so we're here to address any other concerns you have, but we did talk, like I said, to the homeowner association, want to make sure everybody was aware of what we were doing, and so that we didn't have any controversy. Okay,
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
thank you. All right, any commission discussion?
Do we have public comment? Yeah, do we have public comment?
Oh, sorry, yes. Public comment. Would anybody in the public like to come up and make a statement? And if so, please come up and state your name and address. Okay, closing public comment. Now, is there commission discussion? Anybody?
Seems fairly straightforward to me. I don't know what the rest of you think, but there's nothing we could do with regard to zoning rules in the county anyway. It's not, does not seem to be adding additional uses to the parcels that would be joined to the ones that are already in the city. So I don't see any concerns there.
Mhm.
Those are my thoughts. I don't see any problem with it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Right. It does seem like it's just a pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Well, if there is no,
Would you like a motion?
Yeah.
To approve preliminary subdivision application PS 2024-03 for the adjacent adjustment of boundary lines between 31 Chamberlain Loop, tax map number 39-1-1-17, and an adjacent unimproved parcel in Rockbridge County tax map 0750C008 00000040 in accordance with the plat showing boundary line adjustment for Curtis S. and Janice V. Wilbur, Sam W. and Jackie H. Calhoun, and Nancy Trumps, completed by Perkins and Orson as submitted by the applicant.
I
So-
second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. Okay, we will move on to the next. Well, did that take care of both of them?
No.
No.
Okay. All right, here we go. So PS 2024-04, an application by Nancy L. Trumps proposing a preliminary subdivision plat boundary line adjustment for a parcel located at 29 Chamberlain Loop, TM number 39-1-1-18 in Lexington, Virginia, and an adjacent parcel located in Rockbridge County, Virginia. And we will have a staff report.
Just about identical to the last request, and this request is a boundary line adjustment to add 0.175 acre portion of an unimproved tract in Rockbridge County owned by Curtis and Janice Wilbur to a parcel in the city that's 29 Chamberlain Loop Road in accordance with the preliminary plat that's provided to you by Perkins and Orson. Again, it's that area that's hatched in orange that's up for discussion to be added or requested to be added to lot 18 that is part of the the Weatherburn subdivision. Again, so it's a 0.175 acre parcel requested to be added to the lot. That's lot 18 and address is 29 Chamberlain Loop. Staff does recommend that the preliminary plat be approved as submitted. Happy to answer any questions.
All right. Any questions for Arnie? This is essentially the exact same as what we just went through. Any questions? Okay. Well, do we have another applicant statement? Okay. We'll close that section and we'll open public comment. Anybody from the public want to make a comment about this?
Well, you haven't.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Shall I read that into the record? Yeah. Okay, so this is from Steve McAllister. It was sent on July 19th, 2024 to Arnie Glaser. Okay. It says, Arnie, thank you for the time you've taken to provide information and answers. While I do not see the logic of how this is managed between the two jurisdictions and feel that the approach could work to the detriment to an adjoining property owner, I accept that this must be the appropriate legal approach within the Commonwealth of Virginia. While it is not explicitly stated or implied within the application, I would hope that approval of the boundary adjustment include the condition that the additional property be subject to the terms of both the Weatherburn PUD and Weatherburn HOA covenants. Many thanks, Steve McAllister, 3 Ringneck Road, Lexington, Virginia. All right. Any further public comment? Okay. I will close public comments section and open it up to the commission to discuss. So, and I will say about the last line of Steve McAllister's email, that he hopes that the adjustment will be conditioned on the Weatherburn PUD and HOA covenants, that is not something that we can control, correct?
That's correct. The PUD is the zoning. So again, it's the zoning in the county that's going to
Yeah.
be impacting or regulating that particular parcel.
All right, any other comments, thoughts?
Okay, if we're going, I'll be shy. I'll go ahead and move. I move to approve preliminary subdivision application PS 2024-04 for the adjustment of boundary lines between 29 Chamberlain Loop, tax map number 39-1-1-18, and an adjacent unimproved parcel in Rockbridge County, tax map number 0750-C008-00000040 in accordance with the plat showing boundary line adjustment for Curtis S. and Janice V. Wilbur, Sam W. and Jackie H. Calhoun, and Nancy Trumps, completed by Perkins and Orson as submitted by the applicant.
All right,
Second.
and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you all very much for coming. You're welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting, if you would like. Yep. Thanks. I'll give anybody a minute to leave if they are so inclined.
Any other times? Okay.
Okay, moving on to the zoning, annual zoning ordinance amendments, ZOA 2024-03, cottage housing. Can we have a staff report, Arnie?
May I request how long you would want to discuss this evening? If you want to set any sort of limitation or a time.
How about we go until 6:15?
Okay.
Give us some time to actually, since sometimes we have longer meetings and we don't get to spend some time.
All right.
That sound okay with everybody?
Yes.
And we can go longer if you would like.
That sounds, your plan is great.
Yes.
Great.
I only have so much prepared, so we'll see
right.
how far we get. To start on page 19 as an example, you saw at last meeting, you talked about purpose and intent, and Kate put together for what we thought your direction was, which was to combine numbers 2 and 3 into the first from Winchester into the first paragraph, and then pick up the itemized numbers in the shoreline example. So that's what you have now on page 20 as your at least draft version, and perhaps it bears stating that what we're trying to do is put together a draft. This isn't the final that's going to be advertised. Once we get all the bits and pieces and elements put together, you are going to have the opportunity to review it all to make sure it all makes sense together, because now you're looking at specific portions and pieces, and sometimes you need to know how that relates to others. So you will have an opportunity at the end to do that review to make sure it's sort of consistent, and then we'll have it go out for a public hearing. And you can still, after the public hearing comments, you still have the ability to change and modify at that point. As an example for that, in this purpose statement, in that first paragraph, it does talk about alternative designs that meet the objectives and standards may be reviewed through a conditional use permit process. We haven't really decided on that, but so that's something that we need to come back to, sort of highlight or underline and come back to. And we'll even be talking about that alternative design process tonight, because that's baked into some of these other ordinances for cottage housing. And then we're going to pick up on page 21 where the bright red arrow directs us. We started talking last time about density, and perhaps it might be easier to start with sort of the minimum cottages. So each of these little pods, you have to have a minimum number for it to make sense. You can't just have 1 or 2 out there. And for the examples that we have from Winchester and Abingdon, Falls Church and Port Townsend, all of them, well, not all of them, that's not quite true. Most of them start with a minimum number of 4 cottages for one of these cottage housing developments. And the table that we have at least parked or put together and parked a couple of numbers in just as draft on the bottom of page 23, we've continued that 4, but I don't recall if we've actually agreed to that or not. But perhaps we should start with how many you would like to start or require as a minimum for a cottage housing development, and how many you would like to have as a maximum.
4 was thrown about last time, and I do like that.
Mhm. I agree. After thinking about that more, I just think 4 makes sense.
Yes.
Same to me.
So unless there's any other discussion, we'll just continue with the 4.
Mhm.
And any thoughts on sort of the maximum? You have different maximums here from other jurisdictions, anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12. I thought I saw something higher than 12. 18 is in one of the other ones. And then the idea behind this is you don't want too many, because then it doesn't foster that sense of community. So you're not going to know as many neighbors. So I don't know if there's a magic number. And you also notice that some of these have different maximums depending on what type of zoning district it's in. So a lower density zoning district, you might have a lower maximum than you would in a higher density zoning district.
That certainly makes sense to me, to have lower lower numbers where you have lower density, just so that you don't all of a sudden have in a low density area a very high density sort of development. So for us, that would be R2 would have the lowest
A
number,
lower
correct?
number, correct. And then the other thing I realized after listening to your or reading the minutes from your last meeting, there was also a mention of maybe RM. So that wasn't included on here, but RM is your residential multifamily zoning district. So you still have the ability to do these single family type denser things in a residential multifamily development, residential multifamily zoning district if you want. So the table can also be added to include RM if you so desire, or commercial districts or whatever you like. So this is just the draft and a placeholder.
RM actually makes sense to me. You know, whether, and I think Leslie, you had said that last time that
Right,
that
yeah,
RM,
just because one of the others had RM.
Mhm.
We don't have a lot of RM that doesn't already have apartments, but I think it makes sense that if we have anywhere zoned RM that you could do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
cottage
and maybe that would even have a larger number
housing.
for the maximum,
Mhm.
and maybe a larger minimum, frankly. Are there any RM lots that are as small as this minimum lot size?
Oh, I'm not going to know all my sizes, but the ones that come to mind that are zoned RM that are really not, they only have 1 or 2 houses on them, would be along Waddell Street, directly across the street from Maury River Middle School. There are 2 houses on that hill, and
Yeah,
there's about
yep.
3 parcels, and those are all RM. Just as an example, and their sizes are certainly bigger than what these minimums are. I'd be fairly confident in saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So are you looking for guidance on numbers this is for on page 23, correct?
On page 23, that column that says maximum number of cottages per cottage housing development, we've just had the number 12 in with the question mark. So as you're pointing out, in R2 is your lowest density. That would probably be, if you want to go sort of with a graduated sort of number, if you started out with 8 or some number in R2 and they go something denser in R1, perhaps even denser in RLC and RM.
So would having the number in R2 be 8 make sense too?
No, he said more in R.
In R2, you would have fewer number.
That's our lower density one, so you would expect that one to
Oh.
have the lower number
Okay,
of.
okay.
Well, no, I guess we get there the same way. I was sort of looking at the cottage housing requirements on I guess it's Abington's,
Mhm.
just where they put it in terms of cottages per acre.
Mhm.
But I guess my issue is more with the minimum lot size, so 12 is a pretty good starting point. I don't know that we want any pod bigger than 12.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't mind them smaller, and I don't really have a problem if it's the same number for
Yeah.
R1 and R2. I see the point about density, but since they'll have different minimum cottage densities,
Right.
I think having the maximum number of houses can be the same, and 12 seems like a good starting place.
Yeah, I agree. Because we've got that maximum cottage density column there. Seems like it already is indexed to the density of the zoning districts, right?
Right.
I do agree that if we were going to have sort of graduated maximum number of cottages, it would make sense to scale that with the density of the zoning. But I guess I'd only be inclined to do that if we thought that 12 was somehow going to be too many, right? Right, like in some space. But if it seems like the maximum cottage density that's attached to each of the zoning districts already kind of handles that concern, right?
Mhm.
18 sounds like a lot to me in terms of the community
Yes.
part.
Agreed.
So then maybe is the consensus that we stick with 12 as the placeholder for now? And
I think
and,
so.
I mean, we will be revisiting this.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you also like RM just to thrown in to
Yes.
the table as well? Okay, we'll do both of those then.
So this number 12 would be across all of those districts. Is what you're
Right.
saying. Okay.
Although I can imagine in RM that number could be larger,
Yes,
Yeah, right.
like maybe 18 in RM
maybe.
as a placeholder again.
Yeah, I think that's a good thought.
Okay, we'll put in 18 there. And again, this is a placeholder truly to get us started. And then when we come back
Yeah.
and review it more holistically, we'll have a better sense if it makes sense or not.
I agree because I'd like to myself at least do a little bit more reading about like kind of what do we know about community effects conditional on those different sizes, because if you can have these functioning and producing the kind of community that you want with 18, then in RM that would seem suitable.
Right.
We should at least remain open to that.
Although again, it might be too, for one of these communities, 18 is a lot.
It's a lot.
I don't know 18 of my nearest neighbors.
Right. Yeah.
Big neighborhood.
Right. But with a question,
So few areas that we have available anyway.
Right.
You're gonna, it's
right.
really, picturing 18 in any one of the little areas I'm thinking.
Yeah, but actually the one spot that Arnie mentioned, it's a slope, but off of Waddell Street, that's a pretty big lot. I actually could see 18 and it would work there just because it's fairly isolated and
It is.
build on it. And looking at density for RM already, it's 2,400 square feet per unit for a townhouse. So maybe we're looking around 2,000 or
Yeah.
possibly, or
Mhm.
when you get to maximum cottage density, just to kind of throw in a number there too.
So how about we pick up with that then, going down the maximum cottage density column there for R1 as an example. And I think we started this discussion at the last meeting. We've just put in 2.5. So the idea is in R1, which is our unique situation in that we allow one family, but we also allow two family dwellings.
Yeah.
So we have duplexes there. Most of these other ones are doubling up whatever the single family density is. But since we already allow the duplex, and there really wouldn't be a distinction between doubling up the single family for the cottage housing and what we already allow for duplexes. So the question is, do you want to have a little bit of incentive and provide a little bit more density, cottage density in particular, for these cottages to just incentivize that?
Yeah.
And I put in 2.5. It could be 2.25. It could be 3, whatever number that you would like. But the idea was just to incentivize a cottage housing if you want to over the density that would be allowed for a 2-family dwelling in R1.
Mhm.
So I feel like it'll be a lot easier to wrap our minds around this if we take a case study of a lot and say, okay, on this, something that we can all sort of identify, like maybe you have a lot in mind, maybe it's that one on Walker and Houston. But where you look at the property and say, okay, with different numbers in mind, what can go there? Like if we changed it from 2.5 to 2.25 or from 2.5 to 3, what would that look like? Because I think it'll be useful, and a useful exercise.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be that particular.
I'm sorry that I didn't think about it to do it for this evening, but you're absolutely right. It's easy enough to do. We know what the acreage is for those two parcels that are added together, owned by Max at the corner of Walker and Houston Street. And we can certainly do that math quickly for you for the next meeting, at a factor of 2.5 or 3 or even some other, and give you a quick little table to give you an understanding of how many total could potentially go there. Then you still have some limitations on what's going to be eaten up with regard to open space and parking and those types of things. But at least you'll have a sense of, from an aerial photograph that we can also provide, you'll have 10 or 14, whatever the numbers end up being for that parcel. So that we can do that for your next meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It might help, and we probably should have brought it ourselves, but if you could bring back that picture of Thornhill, that proposal, because again, to your point, it is helpful to see.
This one,
Yes, you brought it. You very good. Yeah.
if you would like to see it, I'll pass it around.
And we won't have the ability to sort of superimpose the cottages on top, but we'll at least give you a number
Yeah.
of what can fit.
Great.
Yeah, I think that'll be
It's a little
helpful.
over an acre.
Yeah, we'll do.
All right, so do you have enough information now for this table?
Well, we're not done yet, are we? I don't, on the minimum lot sizes, I know we just added them up. It's sort of like, for instance, on R1, so we're saying if you just add it up, it's 16,000 square feet, which is roughly 0.4 acres. I guess would we allow it on that size? I mean, I'm just wondering, do you say you have to have, for R1, you have to have a minimum of a half an acre or 0.7 acres, or are we okay just kind of leaving it with that and knowing that you probably can't do that when you get to the open space requirements and all that?
And would it help, for you to see what a half acre looks like versus a whole acre? I'm just trying to think of visually how we could maybe help you.
Right.
But just to go back, or to continue with this, in that a lot of these are doing a multiple of whatever the minimum lot size is. So is it 2 times that, or is it 3 times the minimum lot size to get you to that minimum overall lot area before you can even start a cottage housing?
Right. So the 8,000 is the minimum lot size in R1. Correct. So right now on one lot, you can put 2 houses right now. Duplex.
Yeah.
So then just doing the math, we're just going up. So we've got the minimum number of cottages is 4. So that's exactly what is allowed now. Although you're saying the minimum lot size accommodates 5. So that's the 2.5.
Yeah.
Yes.
But can I go back, correct one
Sure.
particular thing that I just didn't, I agreed that on a 8,000 square foot lot size, you could put a 2-family. That's not true in the 2-family. And that's also why we provide you your lot requirements table. So you do have to bump up to a 12,000 square foot minimum parcel size for a 2-family. So there's a little bit of a hit to put a
I see.
2-family in, just to make you aware of that.
Okay.
But for R1, we're basically saying you just have to have a double lot of the minimum lot size in R1. You just have to have 2 of them, and you could potentially put cottage housing.
And then you said that's 4/10 of a,
Yes.
Roughly. so that's not that much.
No, and
So-
it seems kind of small.
But it would be just like 4 or max 5 cottages on that
Yeah.
space.
But not typically, technically, in order to have a two-family dwelling, if you've got to have 12,000 square feet, you would, in order to have four of them, you'd have to have 24,000 square feet.
Yeah.
And so that's quite an incentive right
Yeah.
there.
Mhm.
So maybe,
Get to the cottages, yeah.
I don't know, that seems like a, that seems like a lot of housing, a lot of houses on a small lot size.
Would it be helpful when we come back with the two examples, sort of more going back to column one about the minimum cottage density? And would that, and what else could we potentially provide? Two questions, I guess. One is, if we have that, will that help you decide on the minimum lot size, or can we provide you anything else, background information for the minimum lot size?
So I feel like for me, what I'm struggling with a little bit is that we want to incentivize it, but we don't want to make it so that it's overwhelming for the neighborhood.
Right.
And so I think that it's probably just a little bit of a math thing. So if on 24,000 square feet, you can put 4 units. So that, right, on it for
Duplexes.
in R1, maybe we say, well, now you can put 5 on 24,000 square feet, as opposed to on 16,000 square feet, on which you could technically only put 2. You see what I'm saying?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah,
I agree.
that's a very good point.
So minimum lot size of 24,000 square feet for R1, which is roughly half an acre. In that I can envision, and I think you're
Right.
right. I think you can make it fit better in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
Well, you're gonna want some open space and the place for
Right.
parking too.
Right.
Have to
that's
have-
right. Right.
Uh, I definitely see the point. I don't yet feel fully persuaded that we would want to make that change, because I guess what I'm thinking is I still, at least just speaking for myself, need to have a better sense of what 16,000 square feet is. Because rather than thinking about rather than making the determination based on the ratio of like what can be built now to what could be built under the rules, I'd rather look at what 16,000 square feet means, and like what 4 cottages on 16,000 square feet means, and think about, am I making sense?
Mhm.
You had a thought, I think.
I'm trying to figure out how to present that, how to help you with that. In
Yeah.
other words, I can show you a lot that's 16,000 square feet,
Yeah.
but I don't have the design ability to show you reasonably what 16,000 is and put 4 cottages on
Totally.
it as an example.
Right.
That's where I'm going to struggle a little bit.
Right.
What is or do you know the square footage of the one we keep talking about, Max's lot? Like, what is it?
It's going to take me a minute to dig that out. I'm pretty sure I have it
It was
here somewhere.
0.7 acres, I
Right.
think, which is
7 sounds right.
30,000 square feet.
But so I guess the other reason I'm just very gently wanting to sort of just tap the brakes on that idea is that feel like the higher we make these constraints, the lower the likelihood that people will take this up and do it. So, and then looking back at like Winchester's minimum lot sizes are like 8,000 square feet and 11,200. I'm not saying that we should adopt 8,000 square feet as a minimum lot size. But I guess I just am not feeling firmly convinced that from a sort of landscape architecture and community design point of view that 16,000 feet is the wrong number, right? But I see the logic of how you're getting there. Am I making sense?
Yeah, you
Uh-huh.
are. I will say that isn't Winchester the community that has not had any of these because their numbers don't add up? Like they literally can't do it because they've got such a small lot size. So there's I think,
Well, but the minimum. Right. But it can't be that they're not doing it because the minimum lot size is too low.
Winchester's numbers.
Right.
Well, and maybe that's our solution. Maybe we wait on this. We work through the rest and see if we do put a number for open space requirement
Yeah.
and setbacks and see if we can kind of calculate. If you just have 4 houses,
What do you
what
have?
you
Yeah.
should have, yeah.
but then I think we do also have to say, okay, we want this to fit into the community, you know, we
Yeah.
want this to fit into the neighborhood. So if instead of on a lot that is a double size, you know, double the minimum size, instead of having 2 houses, you can have 4. Sorry, instead of so if the minimum lot size is 8,000 square feet, you can have 1 house. And on 16,000, you can have 2 houses. Sorry, a duplex,
Mhm.
Two
Right.
duplexes
no, 1 duplex
on.
on 12,000 square feet.
Right, yep.
1 duplex on 12,000 square feet, but on 16,000 square feet, just 4,000 square feet more, you can have 4 houses
Mhm.
instead of 2. So you're not just, you know, it's like not quite exponential, but it's a big jump for the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So that's my concern, is making sure that we are not putting something that feels extra large
Mhm.
or extra dense in an area that people, that's not what they signed up for when they purchased their house.
I agree, yeah.
This is important to get correct.
Yeah.
I mean,
Really important.
so please let me know if there's anything that we can provide to help you sort of make that determination or decision on what is going to be the right number for us. We may struggle with the design aspects of some of that, but we'll get you whatever you need.
Yeah, I mean, I think these considerations are the right ones. And I share the concern about not wanting to get that the ratio of existing density to the density that would be allowed in one of these developments so out of whack that it's just really jarring.
Mhm.
At the same time, one of our goals is to try to increase density. So there's some optimal ratio in there. And I just feel like I don't have a sense of what it is yet, you know?
Right.
I need to think about it a little bit more.
Well, I think we're gonna have lots of opportunity to
Yeah.
go to go over this, right?
One good example that we have is actually the one over on 201 North Randolph Street, simply because the 3rd Street cottages fit that property. So we had the 8 or 9 units in the 3rd Street cottages example. The lot size is almost exactly the same as the lot size for 201 North Randolph Street, which is the house that burned down that has now been removed from the property. So that one's a really good example of, can you envision those 7 or 8 cottages, you know, on that property, because the boundaries are, the lot dimensions are almost exactly the same. I can't really do that with other properties because of the dimensions and whatnot, but that's just a good sort of visualization. If you could go out there and say, yeah, I've got a picture of what the 3rd Street cottages are, the aerial, can I imagine that density on that vacant parcel?
And sorry, the 3rd Street is,
Falls Church.
No, that was the one from Langley.
Washington.
Okay.
Yeah, do you recall what the area was of the Randolph Street property?
No,
I guess
But-
look it up. I can look later, but
We could bring both of those.
we can bring both
Yeah.
those back, because those
Yeah.
were in your previous
Right.
example. So we have them in the old, but just not remembering exactly what the size of that one is.
that would be great to
Mhm.
see those.
Am I remembering correctly that Langley and Port Townsend were very similar in their?
I don't recall for density and whatnot, that I don't know. But yeah, we can sort of, to help you, we'll bring you a whole bunch of graphics back and
Oh.
perhaps a tables with density to see if we can help you better define what some of these minimum lot sizes and densities should be.
I think that would help.
And if you have any idea in the middle of the night, you can email us and say, for the next meeting, please provide X, and we'll do our best as well. If
Okay.
there's something that you haven't thought of yet, that could help.
For me, it might be helpful to list alongside of these numbers in this Lexington table on 23, the same numbers for that are out of here. Like if we were looking at just a regular, not cottage housing, but just regular numbers, what would they look like alongside of these? I mean, you wouldn't have minimum and maximum number of cottages probably, although maybe you would. But if you have a single family home, if you have a duplex, what are the numbers? Just so that we can compare them to one another. I think that might be helpful for me anyway.
Yes.
Okay, we'll see if we can add that in as another column.
Or maybe rows.
Hmm.
Like R1 single family, you'd have one house, right? And your maximum would be one house for 8,000 square feet. And then you could have another row that had a duplex on it. That would be one duplex or two houses. And then, but it would show the 12,000 square feet. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then I would say the same for the other ones, for the other zoning districts, that is.
Just for sort of, if we were to, take the 24,000 square feet idea, but then sort of align it maybe a little bit with where John is leaning right now. Under Port Townsend, theirs is 20,000. So that's right there in the middle. So maybe that might be a nice compromise. And that's for the low density.
Right.
Or, okay. Do they even have it in their high density? Wait,
It seems like it's
theirs
all
is low
medium
density.
density.
Our lowest density is R2. I'm
Mhm.
trying to, yeah, okay.
We're a little bit backwards
Yeah.
from other folks in
Okay.
that regard. Okay, so we'll work on that table, get you additional information to help you make decisions for both the maximum cottage density column and also the minimum lot size column.
Thank you.
Okay. Because that is going to be one of the more important items in here.
Yeah.
Make sure that we have correct. Not to put pressure, but we want to move on to the next item.
Yes. Well, does anybody
Or yeah.
have anything else on this one? Ready to move on?
Mhm.
Okay.
All right, over on page 24, talking about existing non-conforming structures and accessory two-family dwelling units. We have, and you can tell that there's some DNA in some of these because they're all starting to sort of beg, borrow, and steal from one another. The Winchester is broken down basically in three parts. So we're talking about non-conforming structures. What if you already had a house on a property and you want to develop the rest of the property into a cottage housing development? So Winchester starts out with, on a lot used for cottage housing development, an existing detached single-family dwelling, which may be non-conforming, and there could be any number of reasons for it to be non-conforming. It shall be permitted to remain, but then you can't increase it. So it is what it is, and then you can't make it go more into the setback, or you can't increase the height if that's the part that's non-conforming. So once you have a non-conformity, the idea is not to make it any worse than it already is, as you know. And such non-conforming dwelling units shall be included in the maximum permitted cottage density. So whatever you figure out for density, this is going to count as one of the units, even though it's most likely going to be larger than what the maximum size will be for the other cottage dwellings that are going to be added. And then in A, non-conforming dwelling units may be modified to be more consistent with this article. For example, roof pitches. So later on, when we get into a roof pitch where the minimum roof pitch is X and the maximum is Y, and this is a flat roof structure that is existing, they could put a pitched roof on it because that would make it more conforming with what we're trying to accomplish potentially in this cottage housing if we have minimum roof pitches involved. That comes later. And item 2 there, new accessory two-family dwelling units are not permitted in cottage housing developments. I had to look that up just to make sure that I understood that it was an ADU and not a duplex. So their definition of a dwelling, comma, accessory two family is one where you have two units. One is owner occupied and the other one is no more than 40% of the main unit. So it's an accessory dwelling unit. They just call it a accessory two family dwelling unit. So in the case where you have a new accessory two family dwellings are not permitted. So you're not being able to double up on density. So you can't have the thing and then have cottages and then have accessories to cottages. So they're just trying to make sure where that the nonconformity is fine, but you can't then double up by adding ADUs to it. Any questions there?
So the dwelling, sorry, so let's say you've got um, your non-conforming house, single family house. How does that, so, I mean, you would have to go and say, okay, I want to, you'd have to go before the planning commission and say, get permission to make, I mean, how is adding more houses not making it more non-conforming?
But we're allowing it specifically through this cottage housing. So we're going to be developing design standards that allow cottage housing. So what we would be saying is that thing that's there, you don't have to tear it down. It's probably too big. It's probably a regular size house. It's going to be larger than what these others are. That's fine. It is what it is. We're going to count it as one, and all the rest of the property has to conform to whatever we're going to develop in here. Now, I don't recall any of our examples actually having one that was already existing on the property. Most of them, either they got rid of the one or it was just a greenfield development. And so this is just trying to take into account if you had a property that was large enough to accommodate more units, how do you do that with the thing that exists? So yes, you are making it much more non-conforming, but it's okay because we're allowing that during this cottage housing code that we're developing.
So that speaks to me about how we don't want it to be a by right use, because otherwise I could probably put, one of these in my backyard. I mean, right. I think maybe it might be big enough, right? Without having to come before the planning commission and make sure that it's okay. Certainly my next door neighbor they could, have a bunch of cottages back there. So I think, yeah, okay. Interesting. Thank you.
And then sort of Abingdon, very similar. I really don't have much, I think, that distinguishes one from the other. Sometimes John will ask me which one I prefer.
Yeah.
So would probably prefer Winchester's because it covers more of the existing conditions and tells you what should happen with each of those. And I think the other two are a little bit less specific. So for that reason alone, I think I would recommend the Winchester example.
Yeah, and I like having that number 2 as far as no accessory dwelling units.
Yes.
I'm sorry to always be the dense one here. I'm just making sure I understand the Winchester one because it seems to me to be saying a few different things, right? So am I right that the first thing it's saying is that if you have an existing non-conforming structure, that doesn't prevent you from building a cottage housing community there, and you can keep that existing non-conforming structure, you shouldn't change it to make it more non-conforming, but you can basically change it to make it more conforming is what that A says, right? But then the second part, new accessory family dwelling units are not permitted in cottage housing. That's not about non-conforming existing structures at all, right? That's a claim.
It's a separate thing. You're right. Yeah,
Right.
right.
But then it's saying an existing accessory two-family dwelling may be counted as a cottage unit. So you could so that last sentence in part 2 is about existing non-conforming structures. Am I right about that? So
so again,
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, please.
Again, it's trying to just take what could be on the property and direct us on how to deal with that.
Right. So if I'm reading it correctly, just to put it all together, and again, I'm sorry for slowing things down. I just want to make sure I've got it. So putting it all together, it's saying if somebody were developing a cottage housing community per these rules, if there was an existing non-conforming structure on the property, they could keep it and count it as a cottage. They could do that even if it was set up for two families, actually, right? It says that they can't make changes that would make it more non-conforming. They can make changes to make it more conforming. And then also, it's just sort of like a reminder of something you'd expect to see maybe elsewhere in the rules, right? You can't build a new accessory two-family dwelling unit in a cottage housing development. Am I misreading
Except for
it?
that other piece where if you already have one, it
Right.
now becomes a separate,
It counts as a cottage, basically,
right,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Does it help potentially if you flipped around what's in number two? So you
Yeah.
started out with an existing accessory two-family dwelling, may be counted as a cottage unit if the property is developed subject, and then you just put in the first sentence last, just to say, and you can't have any new ones.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
just flipping it around.
to
a
me it
little.
does, but it almost seems like that first part of two. I mean, I don't care if it appears here too, but it almost seems like if that's the rule, it ought to appear elsewhere and not be buried in a section that's
agree.
about existing non-conforming structures, right?
Perhaps it could live here and then also be restated
Yeah.
wherever it's more appropriate.
Thank you.
Yeah, because you wouldn't look, if you wanted to build an accessory structure, you wouldn't look there for that, yeah.
Right.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind and maybe try to find another home for that sentence.
Thank you.
So is everybody fairly comfortable with more of the Winchester example there for nonconformities?
Yeah.
Okay.
Looks like it, yeah.
And moving on to building height, several of these have this idea of single story or single story plus loft or 1 story or 1.5 story. Just for a reminder, with accessory dwelling units, we went back and forth with 1.5 stories, and then we ended up with just a 25-foot a maximum without stating anything about stories, but that's a different thing, but just as an example. The interesting thought for the Winchesters again is talking about single story or single story plus a loft, about adequate light and air. And then in A on page 25 talks about the maximum roof pitch and the minimum roof pitch, and then B, maximum floor to height area. So if you do have a half story, that loft can be no more than 10 feet. So you don't want to get too tall because then the height of the entire thing. But the thing that they did not state in there is what is the maximum height overall.
Yeah, right.
So if you would use the max of the Winchester example, I would recommend at least a C saying what the maximum overall height would be.
And so like in Abington, they have a maximum building height of 25 feet. And in Port Townsend, they have both a maximum building height and a pitched roof height max. So, which seems to me to make sense. Saying, okay, yeah, 18 feet for the structure, and then you can go up from there for the roof.
But that's not how we measure height. We measure it. from
Right.
the-
That's what I was wondering. So how do we
Oh,
measure it
yeah.
here?
So the way we measure is from the front door at grade up to the highest point.
Up to the highest point of the pitched roof. So
That's how we typically, now we're making an exception. We're specifically stating something else here. So does that, I'm not sure that helps what you were getting ready to say.
it does. I mean, this makes sense to me to say, because I think we don't, if the point of the cottage house is to have a cottage looking house, which is smaller,
Mhm.
then I think that saying that you can have a building that is 20, however, whatever the maximum would be to get some sort of a pitch, maybe it's 20 feet or maybe it's 22 feet, and then you have a 3 pitch, 3 foot from the top to the 20 feet. Does that make sense? I just think that if you're looking for a higher pitched roof and shorter buildings, that this makes sense. The Port Townsend approach makes sense to me.
I guess, are we sold on having it, it can't be more than a story and a half? Are we against having a 2-story because it doesn't let in enough light and air? And I kind of waver on that personally, but
Right. Yeah. I mean, I hear you, but I think the point is to try and say these are little, these are little houses. They are, there's a look to a tall house. And if you have a bunch of tall houses together, then it feels more crowded.
yeah, right.
And I think that we're trying to say, no, these are small. These are more like what you would, wherever these, this type of community, it's a more human scale, more sort of tiny,
Yeah.
not a tiny house, but a small.
But are we going to set footprint size, or are we going to set area of the house? Because I did look at one of them and it actually was footprint, not area of the house.
Some of them say what the maximum area could be for the first floor and what the maximum can be for the second floor. Some of them just give you an overall maximum square footage. So I think we're going to be probably at a square footage maximum. Some of them are like 7,500 for the first floor, no more than 30% of that for the second. So I think if I remember correctly, they're a little bit different in how they calculate.
So if we went that way, I would be fine with just saying 25 feet. It can't be more than 25 feet. If we're going to set a different area requirement for the second story versus the first, kind of.
So you mean like if it's a 750 square feet for the first floor and 500 for the second, is that what you mean?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Can I throw one other question into the mix?
Uh-huh.
And that is, do you want to allow flat roofs?
Yeah, it's got to have some pitch.
Okay. Because that's the way I'm reading Port Townsend's is the maximum building height permitted for structures in cottage housing development shall be 18 feet. To me, you could get a 2-story flat roof, no pitch, flat roof into 18 feet. And then they're saying, if you're going to pitch the roof, you can extend it. They're giving you a little bit of bonus to throw something with pitch on. So and this also gets into sort of your design guidelines, because later on we're going to be talking about some of these are really specific. It should look like a cottage from the 20s and 30s. And so overall, would you prefer these things to be forced to have a pitch roof and not allow a flat roof? Because that comes into play when we're talking about height.
Right.
We don't have many
So-
modern style houses here with
Right.
flat roofs.
It's even less about, for me, it's less about aesthetics and more about maintenance. I mean, my neighborhood has a flat roofed house and it looks fine. I just know my personal experience with a completely flat roof is it doesn't work. It's going to leak at some point. It doesn't matter.
Has a problem.
It always has a problem. And,
Never.
my house is I have a modern house and it's a very low pitched roof.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't have a real problem with the pitch, but I lean towards making sure it has some kind of pitch, more from the maintenance standpoint.
And I would say that from an aesthetic standpoint, we do want it to fit in with the majority of the houses around in the community, which is not to say that it has to be made out of red brick.
Yeah.
But I think that having it be having it have a more traditional look. But we
See,
may
are
be
we
getting
ever
ahead of
gonna go to
ourselves.
that? And I totally understand. I would love to have a cute little neighborhood with all craftsman style houses because I love that, but we know that'll cost more.
Yeah.
So are we even requiring that it be traditional? I don't mind that what style it is, as long as there's some cohesive look to it. But how are y'all envisioning this type of community?
I think that's actually accurate for me as well. There's a house on Walker Street that, as you're going away from Nelson Street, it's on the left-hand side that looks like it's out of Southwest.
Yeah.
And yet, I find it quite,
Yeah, it's beautiful.
it's lovely.
Yeah.
So I think that I think you can have all sorts of different styles and as long as they look nice, it'll work. And then you have the vegetation that makes sure that you're covering up the cars.
So if there may not be as much in sort of the design later on where you have to have 3.5-inch wide trim boards and be
Mhm.
totally traditional, do we still want to require a pitched roof just so that that harmony sort of stays with most of the other pitched roofs that we have? So that may be a little bit more of a unifying element. Then if so, do you want to go so far as what you see on the top of page 25, which is Winchester's, that specifically says maximum roof pitch for cottage housing shall be 12 and 12, and the minimum roof pitch shall be 8 and 12. So that's fairly specific on how. Do you want to get that specific for that unifying element, or are you okay with allowing something lower than that because of other examples that you've seen?
One thing that I keep remembering is when Max was here to talk about this from the point of view of somebody who was considering doing this, there was a kind of, one of the points that he raised was like flexibility, right? And I think we should have some design standards and not total flexibility, to be clear, but I think we should keep the need for there to be flexibility in mind. So I don't know enough about building, but I think some of you may know more to know like what's too rigid, you know, like what's going to be constraining, what's going to drive up costs. Do any of you have a sense of?
What if you just said, there shall, the roof shall be pitched? I mean, that would be, then they could make.
I would say at least a minimum pitch if you're going to do that, like
Okay.
3 and 12 or something. A typical ranch style house with a fairly low pitch is about 3 and 12. If you can picture that, fairly
Yep.
low.
Yep.
Right. I would say to my mind that more important than saying exactly what the pitch is making sure that the
Consistency.
houses are consistent.
Yeah, right. That's a good point.
That you don't have some of those cottage houses in one development have a high pitch and some of them have a 3/12 or yeah, is that the right? No, yeah, 3/12 versus if some of them are 12/12, you don't want some of them to be 3/12. That because then they won't speak to each other. They won't sort of have that consistency. That's my sense on it, that they need to stay within some proportion of each other.
Is it too restrictive to say a minimum of 3/12 and all the houses should have similar pitch? Is that?
Or a pitch within a certain percentage. I don't know
Yeah.
what that would be, you know,
Right.
like so they can't close, but not exact, but
Right.
gives you a little bit of wiggle room as far as.
I would say I would go for a minimum pitch of 4/12.
So it sounds like we're interested in having some pitch to the roofs and not allowing flat roofs.
Mhm.
And so we'll try to figure out how that works best in here. But let's get back to maybe the 1.5 story versus 2-story. I think I'm remembering in one of our background documents, there was a statement that if you required 1.5 stories, that's more expensive to build 1.5 stories than it is to build a 2-story building with a regular old roof on it. You still get a pitched roof if we require the pitched roof. So do we want to necessarily limit to the 1.5 stories or in a certain maximum height, or are we okay doing basically what we did with ADUs, which was no 25 feet, it can be 2 stories if you like. It doesn't have to be limited to a 1.5 stories.
Well, for cottages, it's called a cottage housing. I say, let's just keep it to that.
Meaning 1.5 stories.
Yeah.
I would agree
I
with
can
that.
picture a development down in Georgia that, you know, they did a very, very nice job. I mean, they were sold in no time. So.
1.5 stories, all of them.
Mhm.
Everybody else 1.5 stories, or, and again, this is a placeholder, you know, this is, you're not committing to
Be in
anything.
stone. That's true.
Yeah. So we could like, is it possible to get more information about, this is hard, but like just the difference in cost? No, not really.
I
We-
mean, I
we-
remember that generic statement that
Mhm.
it's more expensive because you're cutting rafters and then trying to fit knee walls in and insulating that, where it's much easier just to double up the framing for the second floor and then put your trusses or your
Mhm.
however you want to do your roof. So that's just quicker and easier than it is to do the 1.5 stories, because that 1/2 story and dormers most likely will get sort of worked into that,
Mm.
but I cannot tell you that it's a factor of
Yeah,
more expensive to do it that way.
right.
Actually, okay, with 2 stories, if we make the different footprint, if the footprint is one size and the second story has to be a percentage of that, then you're gonna get that articulation and, I think you still get kind of a
Isn't-
cottage feel and you just say,
You know,
I don't know, 25 feet.
Sorry if you're right. I automatically assume that if you're going to do a percentage and it's smaller, in my mind, that it's going to be story and a half, but you're right. It doesn't have to be a story and a half because you can set a 2-story
Yeah.
volume and then there's a bump out on the first floor that ends up being the bigger. So yeah,
right,
Okay.
and then that may not, you still will have the change in roofs, but at least you have 2 separate, could have, might not be that as expensive as doing a story and a half.
That's an interesting. How does that sound to you?
You're saying like the second floor might be smaller than the first.
Right, that's what we were talking about some of, I
Yeah.
guess when we get to that section.
Right, so let's say 750 for that first floor and then 500 for the second floor, so you've got, you know, this and this on top,
Yeah.
and then they automatically, I mean, it's not, this second floor is still a full height. Is that how that works? A story and a half?
well, in that example where you have like a bigger bottom floor and a smaller, and then this is just a shed or roof that fits in. So you have 2 full floors here. That's perfectly fine. That's not the story and a half anymore. That's something different.
Mm.
So, but how would that, I mean, technically, how is that different? I mean, so if you, let's say in a story and a half, like my house in Pennsylvania was a story and a half for sure, but in the middle of the upper floor, it was still a full story.
Our definition, and I'm going to paraphrase without looking it up, is we changed it from 3-foot knee wall basically to a 5-foot knee wall.
Right.
So you frame the first floor regular, you put the floor trusses, the floor joists on for that. So it's just a box. And then for a story and a half, the outside wall is only but so tall. In our case, for the half story, it's 5 feet maximum before the roof has to come in.
Think of a Cape Cod, for example.
Exactly. So then you're living under sort of the pitched roof on that second floor in a story and a half, where your example, it's 2 full stories in that section with a regular roof on it. And then the bigger footprint is on the bottom floor, just happens to be an extension.
A bump out, yeah.
So it's not anywhere, you're not doing knee walls, which are only
Right.
5 feet in height before you start angling over. And then you're, I think what you're getting to is your middle roof or room heights are still the same or somewhere within the same realm.
Yeah, I can see where that's a very good option.
Yeah.
What Leslie's throwing out
Yeah.
there. And then the other thing I would contend that if the certain, whoever's doing the building, somebody is going to be doing all of the building in that area. They're not going to designate that so-and-so could build this one and somebody else could build that. It's all going to be by the same builder, correct? Or no, we don't know.
Presumably, I
Yeah.
would think somebody would be hired to do all of them, but
Yeah, but whoever it is, she, I don't know, would take that into consideration in their, proposed cottages, because they would perhaps be able to put, a certain size truss on this house and this house and, save the cost that way. It seems.
be more uniform across the buildings.
Well, what I'm saying is, the houses are not going to all be cookie cutter, but one house might be similar, a few doors down from the other house, and therefore they could have the trusses, for example.
Maybe
So would we allow both 1.5 story and 2-story houses in the same cottage development, or would we say you have to have the same, all of the cottages have to have a consistent height, basically? So if it's a 1.5 story, they're all 1.5 story, then they need to have differences. Or are we saying that you can mix and match? Because that seems like you would get away from having like that sort of look, that consistent look. I don't know.
I think what you're saying right, or what you have the option of doing is doing 1.5 story, as several of these have done, probably more of the ones from the Northwest, because they want that cottage or that Cape Cod style where that upper level is tucked into the roof in some fashion. But if you go to, let's say, a 25-foot maximum and you say that the bottom floor is X and the top floor is a little bit smaller, that doesn't preclude necessarily from somebody mixing and matching 2 stories and 1.5, unless you say specifically in here that each of these has to be only 2-story or only 1.5 stories, if that's what you want.
Okay, so that's to be determined.
And I think if you're going to have the condominium type ownership, you're going to want to make things more similar
Yeah.
because you're all going to chip in to pay the fees for it. I do think it would be fine to mix 1-story and 2-story. I kind of look at Weatherburn. If you just take a few of those houses and they blend pretty well. I do think you'll get to Mary Stewart's point of where they'll be pretty similar. You might just do some exterior changes because you're trying to keep your costs down and you're going to have to do the long-term maintenance through the condominium ownership model.
Right.
I'm okay with mixing 1 and 2. I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
We started at 1.5, but I think we've sort of expanded maybe to allowing 2 stories. Is that a correct statement?
I think if the second floor has a smaller footprint.
We'll get to that later on. Okay, so we'll put that in and maybe we'll sort of pick and choose from what we've got here. But the last one before, and I know I'm over my time and I apologize, can we hit a maximum height? Can we put a placeholder in?
Use 25 for the ADUs. And
Sold.
yeah, I don't know why it would
Yeah.
be much different.
I agree.
Yeah.
Anybody have any? All right, 25 it is. All right,
Oh,
and
sorry,
oh,
not to bring it up, but why no basement or crawl
yes,
space on one of
same.
them?
same, I have the same
I'm
question.
gonna take a guess because they're supposed to be smaller.
Right.
And then they didn't want, I guess, you to double up your square footage by adding a basement, but what does it hurt if
Right.
you have the ability to do the basement? So I don't know exactly what the intent there was.
I did not have a problem with the basement.
Wouldn't it be more expensive though, if you have to put a basement?
Right.
Right,
so
but
be up
that's
to
the choice,
builder,
right? But yeah.
right.
A full basement's definitely more expensive than a crawl space.
Especially here when they hit rock.
Yeah, indeed.
Did Max not mention something about basements for
Yeah,
storage?
he was
or-
imagining that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Use the
don't see why
option
it'd be a
to add 'em.
problem, you know.
And,
again?
you know, as long as the maximum height is there and there are other constraints, does it matter if there's I don't.
I think as long as the first floor starts at ground level as opposed to having the basement jack the floor up.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
I
So maybe a maximum of they have 4-foot crawl space or a basement foundation below grade, something like that.
I don't have any problem with a full basement as long as it doesn't change the height of the house above, like 25 feet from ground. That's all you got.
I think Leslie's point is if you don't want to jack it up, at least for the crawl space, you say no more than X for the crawl space. The crawl space, well, actually can be underground a little bit too. But I think the idea was just to not have maximum height before you can start counting up. But in either case, we'll do 25 feet. And if we need to come back with crawl spaces and basements and
Yep.
consider that, we can do that in the future.
Okay, sounds great. All right. Where's my agenda? Okay, we will put that to rest for the moment and go on to other business. Do we have a zoning and planning report?
We do. We had a kickoff meeting last week for the Housing Conditions Windshield Survey. That's the CDBG planning grant that we received. Summit Design and Engineering was chosen. They will take about 2 months to gather data, including GIS data and census data. And then in that 3rd month from now, we expect them to actually do the windshield survey where they will drive around / walk around and do an assessment of all the single family housing and score them according to a 1 to 5 scale that they've developed. So that's where we are with that particular project. Another project to mention is AECom Engineering Company and Planning and Design Company is designing 3 projects in Jordan's Point Park. One is a small picnic area. The other is the overlook there where the bridge abutment is, where most people go to also now get into the water. And then also change the drive. So you will go into the park and turn before you get to the ball field there, soccer field, instead of going around. And that way you'll have a little bit more direct access to the area to put in. So those are 3 projects that are being designed currently. I think they still need to find money from council for the implementation of those things, but that planning work is going on. And all 3 of those are items that are in the current Jordan's Point Park Master Plan.
Great.
And the last item is we do expect that regional housing study from the Planning District Commission to be completed any day now and out for public. And I'm sure we'll have some comments and review, and Threshold will certainly be reviewing that to see if there are any implementation measures or anything that can be done with the information that comes out from that regional housing study.
Great. All right. Anybody have any questions for Arnie? All right. Any updates on our key annual PC milestones? All right. City Council report.
Sure. City Council met last Thursday and we started with the work session where Arnie went over batch A of the zoning amendments with council. And the only change that came out of that, and you probably read it in the newspaper, was council wanted to add Richardson Park to the list of parks allowing food trucks. So we'll advertise it that way. And then during our regular meeting, we had several of the planning items that you'd already worked on. The preschool that was approved, the
Physical.
yeah, I'm trying to remember what kind of permit it was, CUP for the preschool, and then the boundary line adjustments on Catalpa and Lime Kiln Road, those 2 properties, that was approved as well. The Maple Lane properties, that was approved, and council is going to have a future work session on not the houses, but that empty lot that's in between, if it should remain in the commercial use on the future land use map and in the opportunity zone. As we approved it, it remained in those areas, just like when Planning Commission, but we'll look at it just so everybody understands why it's like that and what the impact is. And then we had the ADU and that was approved as well. And in case you know anybody, Threshold, we're looking for a member for the Planning Commission, but Threshold Housing Commission is also looking for a member, and they don't have the residency requirement that you have to be a Lexington resident. So if you know anybody who's interested in that, you might mention it to them. And that's all I have.
All right. Well, here we are at the end of the agenda.
Ready?
I'll take up Pat's, we can just
Fight over
stay here.
After you.
I'll make an amendment, we adjourn.
I'll second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.